Adam Williams walked into the primal den on a Tuesday night in November, and the temperature dropped 15 degrees. Not outside. Inside, the radiators hissed and sputtered like they were protesting something. But the warmth they'd been pushing into the room for the past hour simply vanished. I watched the condensation on my beer taps frost over in seconds. The regular at the bar, old Mr. Patterson, pulled his jacket tighter without seeming to notice he'd done it. Adam stood in the doorway for a moment, snow melting in his dark hair, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He wasn't looking for someone. He was looking for something. And when his gaze finally settled on the empty stool at the far end of my bar, I saw his shoulders drop like he'd been carrying a weight for miles. He took that seat, ordered a whiskey neat, and proceeded to tell me a story that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the nature of humanity itself. The strange part wasn't what he told me. The strange part was what started happening to everyone else in Biddeford the moment he arrived. I'm Jason Fox, bartender for over 20 years. This one still keeps me up at night. Adam was polite, quiet, the kind of customer who tips well and doesn't cause trouble. For the first 3 weeks, he came in every Tuesday and Thursday. Always ordered the same whiskey, always sat at the same stool. He never touched his phone, never tried to make conversation with the other patrons. He just sat there, nursing his drink, watching the door like he expected someone to walk through it at any moment. The only unusual thing about him, beyond the cold that seemed to follow him everywhere, was his hands. They were scarred, not the kind of scars you get from an accident or two. These were deliberate, symmetrical patterns carved into his palms and the backs of his hands. They looked old, like they'd been there since childhood, but they hadn't faded the way old scars do. They were still raised, still pink against his pale skin. When he noticed me looking at them one night, he closed his fists and changed the subject so quickly it felt like a door slamming shut. The first incident happened in early December. A woman named Sarah Chen had been coming to the Primal Den for years. She worked at the shipyard, always came in on Fridays with her crew. Tough, funny, the kind of person who could diffuse an argument with a single joke. That Friday she walked in looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were bloodshot, her movements jerky and uncertain. She ordered a beer and then just stared at it, not drinking, not speaking. When one of her co-workers asked if she was okay, she turned to him and said something that made the entire table go silent. She told him she'd been having dreams about running through the woods on all fours, tasting blood in her mouth, hearing the heartbeat of something small and terrified beneath her. She said it felt more real than being awake. She said she'd woken up that morning with dirt under her fingernails and pine needles in her hair, even though she lived in an apartment on the 3rd floor and hadn't been outside in 2 days. Her co-worker laughed nervously, suggested she lay off the late-night horror movies, but Sarah didn't laugh. She just kept staring at her beer, and when she finally looked up, her eyes met Adam's across the room. He'd been watching her, and the expression on his face wasn't surprise. It was recognition. I only understood this later, but Sarah was the first. Over the next few weeks, 3 more regulars started exhibiting the same symptoms. They'd come in looking exhausted, talking about dreams of hunting, of running, of a hunger that couldn't be satisfied with food. They'd find scratches on their bodies they couldn't explain, wake up in strange places with no memory of how they'd gotten there. And every single one of them had the same encounter. They'd catch Adam watching them and something would pass between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement of something neither of them wanted to name. I started paying closer attention to him after that. I noticed the way he'd tense whenever the moon was mentioned, the way he'd excuse himself and disappear into the bathroom whenever someone walked in wearing silver jewelry. I noticed that he never, ever ordered anything with meat in it, even though our burgers were the best in Biddeford. And I noticed the small leather journal he kept in his coat pocket, the one he'd pull out sometimes and write in with a hand that shook just enough to make the words unreadable from where I stood. Around the 1,500-word mark, I discovered something that should have been impossible. Late one Thursday night, Adam was the last customer in the bar. He'd had 4 whiskeys, which was more than usual, and his guard was down. He asked me if I believed in curses. Not the superstitious kind, he clarified, the real kind. The kind that gets passed down through bloodlines that marks a family for generations, that you can't escape no matter how far you run. I told him I'd heard a lot of stories in my time, that I tried to keep an open mind about the world's strangeness. He seemed to consider this, his fingers drumming against the scarred patterns on his hands. Then he asked me if I'd ever heard of the mark of Cain. I told him sure. From the Bible, the mark God placed on Cain after he killed his brother Abel, to protect him from being murdered himself. Adam smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. He told me that most people got the story wrong. The mark wasn't protection, it was a warning. And it wasn't just for Cain, it was for all his descendants. By January, 7 people had been affected. 7 regulars who'd started having the same dreams, the same symptoms, the same inexplicable changes. They'd all stopped coming to the bar. When I ran into Sarah at the grocery store, she looked healthier than she had in weeks. But there was something different about her. Something feral in the way she moved, the way her eyes tracked movement. She told me she'd been spending more time outdoors, that it helped with the restlessness. She didn't mention the dreams, but when I asked if she'd seen a doctor, she just shook her head and walked away quickly, like she was afraid I'd ask more questions. That night, Adam came in earlier than usual. He ordered his whiskey and then sat there for a long moment before speaking. He told me he was born in a small town in Montana that wasn't on any map. He said his family had been there for generations, isolated, living by rules that the outside world would never understand. He said they were descendants of the first man, the one who'd been cast out of Eden. Not Adam the innocent, but Adam the cursed, the one who'd watched his son become a murderer and his bloodline become tainted with something ancient and hungry. I didn't know what to say to that. It sounded like the ramblings of someone who'd had too much to drink, but Adam was stone-cold sober despite the 4 whiskeys he'd consumed. His eyes were clear, focused, and utterly serious. He told me that in his family, the curse manifested differently in different people. Some just had the dreams. Some had the hunger, and some, like him, had the full transformation. He said he'd been running from it for 15 years, ever since his 21st birthday when it had fully awakened in him. He'd traveled all over the country, never staying in one place for more than a few months, always trying to outrun what he carried in his blood. But everywhere he went, the same thing happened. People around him started to change, started to feel the pull of something ancient and wild. He called it sympathy transformation, a kind of psychic contagion that spread his curse to others, diluted but still powerful enough to ruin lives. The medium-sized twist came around the 2,200-word mark, and it changed everything I thought I understood about what was happening. I'd assumed Adam was dangerous, that he was somehow infecting people against his will, that the right thing to do would be to ask him to leave and never come back. But then Helen Morrison walked into the primal den. Helen was in her 70s, a retired teacher who came in every Sunday afternoon for a single glass of wine. She was kind, sharp-witted, and had lived in Biddeford her entire life. She'd known everyone, remembered everything. When she saw Adam, she went pale. She walked straight up to him, and in a voice that carried across the entire bar, she asked him if his grandmother's name was Ruth. Adam stared at her like she'd just spoken in a language he thought was extinct. He nodded slowly. Helen sat down next to him without asking permission and told him that Ruth had been her college roommate in 1962. She said Ruth had been brilliant, troubled, and had dropped out in her junior year without explanation. She'd written Helen one letter after leaving, talking about going home to face something that had been waiting for her since birth. Helen had never heard from her again. Adam's expression cracked. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine emotion break through the careful control he maintained. He told Helen that his grandmother had been the last person in his family to try to break the curse. She'd left Montana, gotten an education, tried to build a life outside the isolated compound where generations of his family had hidden from the world. But the curse had found her anyway. It always did. When she'd realized she was pregnant, she'd known she had a choice. She could stay away and let her child grow up free, never knowing what they carried in their blood. Or she could go home and teach them how to survive it. She'd chosen survival. And it had cost her everything. Helen reached across and took Adam's scarred hand in both of hers. She told him that Ruth had been the bravest person she'd ever known, and that whatever burden he was carrying, he didn't have to carry it alone. That was when Adam started to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears running down his face while he stared at his empty glass. And that was when I realized I'd been wrong about everything. By mid-February, The situation in Biddeford had evolved into something I couldn't ignore. The 7 people who'd been affected weren't sick. They were thriving. Sarah had quit her job at the shipyard and started a wilderness guide company. Another regular, Tom Braddock, had lost 40 pounds and run his first marathon. A third, elderly Mr. Patterson, had started painting again after 20 years, creating these wild, vibrant landscapes that captured something raw and alive. They all credited the same thing. They said they'd reconnected with something primal in themselves, something they'd been taught to suppress their entire lives. They felt more alive, more present, more real than they ever had. And they all spoke about Adam with a kind of reverence, like he was a teacher who'd unlocked something essential in them. I started to understand that what I'd thought was a curse might be something else entirely. Or maybe it was both, a curse and a gift, depending on how you chose to see it. Adam started opening up more after his conversation with Helen. He told me that the isolation his family had chosen wasn't about protecting the world from them. It was about protecting themselves from a world that would destroy them if it knew what they were. He said the transformation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, a connection to the earth, to the animal world, to something that existed before civilization tried to tame it. He said his ancestors had learned to live with it, to integrate it into their lives in ways that honored both their human and animal natures. But the modern world didn't have space for that, so they'd hidden, and in hiding, they'd forgotten how to teach the younger generations to accept what they were. That was the real curse. Not the transformation itself, but the shame and fear that surrounded it. The large twist at the 5,000-word mark shattered my understanding of Adam's story completely. I'd been closing up late one night when I heard shouting outside. I went to the window and saw Adam in the parking lot, facing down 2 men I'd never seen before. They were big, dressed in dark clothing, and they had the kind of presence that made my instincts scream danger. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw one of them grab Adam's arm. That's when things got strange. The street lights flickered and went out. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath inside the bar. And Adam changed. Not into a wolf, into something else. His shadow stretched and twisted, growing larger, more defined, until it looked like a massive beast standing behind him. The 2 men stumbled backward, falling over themselves to get away. They ran to their car and peeled out of the parking lot so fast they left skid marks. When the lights came back on, Adam was alone, standing perfectly still, his hands clenched into fists. I went outside and asked him what the hell had just happened. He looked at me with eyes that reflected light like an animal's and told me those men were from his family. They'd been sent to bring him home, because he hadn't just run away 15 years ago. He'd stolen something. The something turned out to be knowledge. Specifically, a journal that had been kept by his family for generations, documenting their history, their abilities, and most importantly, the methods they'd developed to control the transformation. Adam's family guarded that knowledge jealously, believing it was too dangerous to let outsiders know that people like them existed. But Adam believed the opposite. He thought the knowledge should be shared, that others who carried dormant versions of the curse, who had no idea why they felt the way they did, deserved to understand themselves. So he'd taken the journal and run. For 15 years, he'd been trying to figure out how to share what he knew without putting himself or others in danger. And everywhere he went, people started to awaken, started to feel the pull of their own hidden natures. He wasn't infecting them. He was catalyzing something that had always been there, buried under years of civilization and suppression. The implications were staggering. Adam explained that his family weren't the only ones carrying this genetic legacy. They were just one branch of a much larger tree. Descendants of that first family scattered across the world, diluted through countless generations of intermarriage and migration. Most people who carried the gene would never know it. It would stay dormant their entire lives, expressing itself only in dreams, in unexplained urges, in a sense of not quite fitting into the human world. But under the right conditions, in the presence of someone like Adam, whose own gene was fully expressed, it could wake up. That's what had happened to Sarah, to Tom, to Mr. Patterson and the others. They'd been carriers all along, and proximity to Adam had triggered their dormant inheritance. Around the 5,500-word mark, things escalated in a way none of us expected. The men who'd confronted Adam came back. This time there were 5 of them, and they weren't being subtle. They walked into the primal den on a busy Friday night and demanded that Adam leave with them immediately. The bar went silent. Sarah was there. So were Tom and 3 others who'd been affected. They stood up as one, forming a barrier between Adam and the men. The leader of the group, a hard-faced man with scars similar to Adam's, told them they didn't understand what they were interfering with, that Adam had committed a crime against his family by stealing their sacred knowledge, and that he needed to face the consequences. Sarah asked what kind of consequences. The man didn't answer directly. He just said that Adam's family had ways of dealing with thieves that were older than the laws of any government. That's when Helen Morrison, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. She told the men that she'd been researching Adam's family since meeting him, that she'd found records of their existence going back over 200 years, always in isolated places, always keeping to themselves. But she'd also found something else. Death certificates, dozens of them. Young people, always in their 20s, always listed as accidents or suicides. She'd cross-referenced the names with the genealogies Adam had shared from the journal. Every single one of those deaths had been family members who'd tried to leave, who'd tried to share the truth about what they were with the outside world. Adam's family didn't bring back thieves to face justice. They silenced them, permanently. The bar erupted. My regulars, people who'd known Helen their entire lives, started shouting at the men to get out. Someone threatened to call the police. The hard-faced leader looked around at the crowd, at the anger and solidarity, and I saw something flicker in his expression: uncertainty, maybe even fear. He told Adam this wasn't over, that he could surround himself with all the unknowing humans he wanted, but eventually he'd have to face his family. Then they left. The aftermath of that confrontation changed everything. Adam stopped hiding. He started meeting regularly with Sarah and the others who'd been affected, teaching them what the journal contained, how to recognize the signs of transformation, how to guide it instead of fighting it, how to maintain control and integrate both aspects of their nature. Word spread. People started coming from other towns, other states. People who'd always felt different, who'd had the dreams, who recognized something in themselves they'd never had a name for. The primal den became an unofficial gathering place for them. I'd never seen anything like it. People discovering they weren't alone, that the thing that made them feel broken was actually a connection to something ancient and powerful. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, but Adam was deteriorating. The stress of being found, of knowing his family was still hunting him, was taking its toll. He lost weight, stopped sleeping. The cold that followed him everywhere grew more intense. By March, frost formed on the windows whenever he entered a room, even though spring had technically arrived. I asked him one night why he didn't just give the journal back, disappear somewhere they'd never find him. He told me he couldn't, because it wasn't about him anymore. All these people who'd awakened, who'd found community and understanding, deserved to have access to the knowledge. If he gave it back, if he ran, the journal would be locked away again for another generation, and all these people would be left struggling alone with something they didn't fully understand. He said some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight cost you everything. The second large twist came around the 7,500-word mark, and it changed my understanding of what was truly at stake. Helen had continued her research, going deeper into the archives than I'd thought possible for a retired teacher with limited resources. She found something that even Adam hadn't known. His family wasn't hiding because they were dangerous. They were hiding because they were being hunted. There was an organization, old and well-funded, that had been tracking families like Adam's for centuries. This organization believed that the werewolf gene, as they called it, was an evolutionary threat to humanity. That if it spread too widely, if too many people awakened to their animal nature, civilization itself would collapse. They'd been systematically finding and eliminating carriers for generations, always making it look like accidents, always covering their tracks. Adam's family had survived by staying isolated, by keeping their existence secret, but by trying to spread the knowledge, Adam had put a target on everyone he'd awakened, and the organization was already moving. Helen showed us the evidence. News reports of strange accidents in 3 different states, 5 people who died in the past 2 months, all connected to online forums where Adam had shared information. All listed as suicide or misadventure, but the details were too similar, too convenient. Someone was cleaning up, eliminating anyone who'd been exposed to the truth about the werewolf gene. We realized Adam's family hadn't been trying to punish him when they came to bring him back. They'd been trying to save him, to get him back to the compound before the organization found him. The hard-faced man and his team had been Adam's cousins, sent by desperate parents who knew what was coming. We'd sent them away. We'd made Adam even more vulnerable. The final weeks were tense. Adam knew he had 2 choices. He could go back to his family, disappear into their protected isolation, and save himself. But that would mean abandoning everyone he'd awakened, leaving them exposed and vulnerable to an organization that saw them as evolutionary threats. Or he could stay, continue teaching and sharing, and accept that he was probably going to die. He asked me what I thought he should do. I told him I was just a bartender, that I didn't have the wisdom to make that kind of call. He smiled and said that was exactly why he was asking me. Because I wasn't part of his world, wasn't carrying the weight of his legacy. I had perspective he couldn't access. So I told him the truth. I said I thought courage wasn't about making the brave choice. It was about making the right choice even when you were terrified of the consequences. And that only he could decide what right meant in this situation. Adam chose to stay. He made copies of the journal, digital and physical, and distributed them to dozens of people across the country. He created a network, a way for carriers to find each other and share knowledge safely. He taught everyone he could reach how to recognize the signs of the organization's involvement, how to protect themselves, how to build community in ways that didn't paint targets on their backs. And then one Tuesday night in late March, he came into the primal den, sat at his usual stool, ordered his usual whiskey, and told me it had been an honor knowing me. I asked him where he was going. He said back to Montana, back to his family's compound, not to hide, but to teach them what he'd learned. That isolation wasn't protection. That shame and fear were the real curses, not the transformation itself. He said his family needed to hear that from him, even if they didn't listen, even if it cost him everything. He left the next morning. I never saw him again. But 3 months later, I got a letter from the Montana compound, from an address that probably wasn't on any official map. It was from Helen, who'd apparently accompanied Adam on his journey. She said Adam had been welcomed home, not as a thief, but as a teacher, that the family had listened to him, had seen the evidence of how many people he'd helped. They'd voted to open their community, cautiously, to others who carried the gene, to stop hiding and start building bridges. Helen said Adam was currently teaching the younger generation, sharing the knowledge that had been hoarded for so long. She said he seemed happy, that he'd finally found a way to honor both his heritage and his convictions. And she said the organization was still out there, still hunting, but that the network Adam had built was holding strong, people watching out for each other, sharing information, refusing to let fear dictate their lives. Sarah still comes into the primal den. So does Tom and Mr. Patterson and a dozen others who found their way to Biddeford over the past year. They're careful, aware that being open about what they are could put them in danger. But they're also alive in a way I've rarely seen, connected to themselves and each other in ways that seem to transcend normal human relationships. And sometimes, on the coldest nights in winter when the wind howls through the streets of Biddeford like something ancient and wild, I think I can feel what Adam tried to teach them, that we're all carrying legacies we don't fully understand. That civilization is a thin veneer over something much older and stranger. That maybe the things we're taught to fear about ourselves are actually the things that make us most fully alive. The temperature in the bar still drops sometimes, for no reason the heating guy can explain. And when it does, my regulars smile knowingly, like they're feeling the presence of something that refuses to be forgotten. What if the things we call curses are actually just parts of ourselves we haven't learned to accept? What if the monsters in our stories are echoes of a truth we've been running from for so long, we've forgotten what we were afraid of in the first place? I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city or state in the comments. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. How many people out there are carrying their own versions of what Adam carried. Have you ever felt like there was something wild in you? Something that didn't fit into the neat categories the world gave you? Ever wondered if the restlessness you feel isn't a flaw, but a feature? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone, and who knows, maybe your experience will help someone else understand themselves better. Maybe we're all descendants of that first family, all carrying traces of something older than civilization. If this story got under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more where this came from. Stories of the strange and unexplained that walk among us every single day. See you in the next story if you dare.